Jake Sullivan sat in his cold metal cell on the spaceship called Concordia's Dream. The walls showed bright pictures that kept repeating his crimes over and over again. The pictures said he stole old artifacts and broke into places he wasn't supposed to go. They said he would be killed as soon as they reached the Zephyrian planet. Jake had been watching these same lies for 6 hours. What he really did was much more dangerous than stealing. He found out that the Galactic Trade Consortium was destroying cultures on purpose. They were erasing history that didn't match their official stories. The ship hummed as it traveled through space, taking him to the Zephyrian home world. There, judges who never let anyone go free would decide his fate. Through the clear walls of his cell, he could see other prisoners who were also going to die. His cellmate was Dr. Elena Vasquez. She lay on the metal bench trying to sleep, but the bright wall pictures never turned off. She had been arrested for digging up ruins that the government said didn't exist. Jake thought her real crime was the same as his finding proof that the government was lying about history. "Can't sleep either," she whispered without opening her eyes. "Too much to think about," Jake said quietly. He had learned that their cell wasn't really private, even though the guards said it was. Elena sat up. As someone who studied old civilizations, she automatically looked around their prison for anything useful. "I've been thinking about the words they use to charge us. The consortium uses special language when they want to make someone disappear forever." Jake nodded. He appreciated how she thought about their problem. "They're not saying we discovered something or did research. They're saying we stole something and broke rules. That makes it sound like we took something that belonged to someone else." "But we didn't take anything," Elena said. "We just found evidence that certain historical records have been hidden on purpose. That makes us dangerous in a different way than thieves. Thieves can be killed and forgotten. People who uncover lies about history can become heroes if you're not careful about how you handle them." Heavy footsteps in the hallway made them both stop talking. Zephyrian guards walked in a special way. Their scaly feet made clicking sounds that were both scary and musical. Jake had studied their language enough to recognize different guards by how they walked. 3 guards stopped outside their cell. Their reptile faces could be seen through the clear wall as they looked at tablets that probably had instructions about moving prisoners. The lead guard was older, with scars on his scales that showed he had been a soldier for a long time. The younger guards showed him respect. "Transport arrives at Kethmoran in 14 hours, the lead guard said in the Zephyrian language, which made sounds that regular galactic language couldn't copy. "The human language expert goes to immediate trial. The person who digs up old things goes to the consortium research facility for questioning." Jake kept his face blank even though he understood every word. He had studied dead languages in school, including Zephyrian dialects, but he never put that skill on any official records. "Commander Thexville," one of the younger guards said, "the human's file says he knows 12 dead languages. Should we ask for extra security during transport?" Thexville looked at Jake through the clear wall like someone checking how dangerous he might be. "Dead languages can't hurt anyone. It's living languages that cause problems. Keep using normal procedures." The guards walked away, their conversation getting quieter as they continued their patrol. Jake waited until their footsteps completely disappeared before thinking about what he had learned. 14 hours, Elena said quietly. "Not much time to figure out how to survive this. The commander seems professional. That's probably better than dealing with crazy people or those who enjoy hurting others. Professional killers are still killers, Jake. They just feel bad about their work." Jake looked at the wall pictures still showing his fake crimes. The clean language of galactic law made cultural destruction sound like paperwork violations. Elena, what did you really find in those ruins? The real discovery, not the cleaned-up version in your arrest record. She was quiet for a long time, thinking about whether to be honest when they were both going to die anyway. Building records. Construction methods that were supposed to be simple, except they show math knowledge that shouldn't have been possible for the species that built them. Which means either the official timeline is wrong or certain species were made to look stupid in official records. Maybe both. Jake nodded, understanding what this meant. I found language evidence of the same thing. Languages that were supposedly dead actually show development patterns that continue into recent times. Someone has been actively stopping them while claiming they died out naturally. The commander paused over his tablet, and Jake caught a flicker of something that might have been uncertainty in the alien's expression. Your analysis of archived materials led to what conclusions? This was dangerous territory. Jake had to provide enough information to seem cooperative without revealing discoveries that would make him an even higher priority for elimination. Some languages showed development patterns that suggested they were more sophisticated than previously understood. Grammar structures that indicated advanced mathematical and philosophical concepts. Which languages specifically? Jake felt sweat forming despite the room's controlled temperature. This question would determine whether his death was routine or urgent. Preconsortium Alarion. Classical Dendrite. Early Zephyrian spiritual dialects from before the military expansion period. Thexville's stylus stopped moving entirely. The silence stretched long enough for Jake to wonder if he had just signed his own death warrant with too much honesty. You studied Zephyrian spiritual dialects? The commander asked, his voice carefully neutral. Historical analysis only. Academic interest in how religious concepts evolved during cultural transition periods. And what did this historical analysis reveal? Jake looked directly into Thexville's reptilian eyes, recognizing something that hadn't been there moments before: personal interest disguised as professional inquiry. That preconsortium Zephyrian culture was significantly more complex than current historical records suggest. The spiritual dialect contained philosophical concepts that were apparently abandoned when your people transitioned to military organization. The two younger guards exchanged glances, their discomfort obvious even to human observation. Thexville set down his stylus and leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone who had encountered unexpected complications. Prisoner Sullivan, he said slowly, are you aware that accessing preconsortium Zephyrian texts requires special authorization from the Cultural Preservation Council? I was not aware such authorization existed. The materials were available through standard academic archives. Which should not have been possible. Preconsortium texts are classified materials restricted to authorized scholars with specific cultural research credentials. Jake felt the floor shifting beneath his understanding of the situation. Are you saying I accessed materials that I shouldn't have been able to find? I am saying that someone with administrative access provided you with materials that are normally kept under security protocols. Thexville's expression suggested he was calculating implications that extended far beyond prisoner transport procedures. The evaluation continued for another hour, but Jake could sense that something fundamental had changed in the commander's approach. Questions became more specific, focusing on exactly which archives he had accessed and how he had obtained permission to study restricted materials. When they returned him to detention, Elena was waiting with the expression of someone who had spent the time developing theories about their situation. How did it go? She asked once the guards had left. Complicated. I think I've been accessing materials that were supposed to be classified. Someone with high-level access has been providing researchers with restricted historical records, which means there's a conspiracy to reveal suppressed information. And we're not the only ones who've discovered evidence of cultural manipulation. Jake settled onto his bench, processing the implications of what he had learned. Or someone in authority positions has been deliberately allowing researchers to find evidence, possibly as part of a larger plan to expose the consortium's historical revisionism. That's either very good news or very bad news, depending on whose plan we've stumbled into. Through the transparent wall, Jake could see Commander Thexville in conversation with his subordinates. Their body language suggested intense discussion about something that wasn't covered by standard prisoner transport procedures. "Elena," Jake said quietly, "I think we're about to discover whether professional soldiers follow orders or conscience when the two come into conflict." She followed his gaze toward the guard's discussion. "What makes you think conscience is an option?" "Because the commander just found out that standard procedures might not apply to our situation. And judging by his expression, he's not entirely comfortable with improvising solutions to problems that aren't supposed to exist." Keth Moran rose from the toxic atmosphere of the Zephyrian homeworld like a crystal dream given architectural form. Its towers stretched toward space while floating platforms maintained perfect geometric harmony above the poisonous clouds below. Jake pressed against the transport shuttle's viewport, watching his destination grow larger with each passing moment. "Impressive," Elena said from the seat beside him, her archaeological training automatically cataloging the construction techniques visible in the city's soaring spires. "Though I noticed they built everything to hover above the planet's surface rather than trying to fix the environment." "Practical solution to ecological disaster," Jake replied, though his linguistic training made him notice something else. The architectural patterns matched grammar structures from ancient Zephyrian texts, as if the city itself was a form of written language, expressing concepts that couldn't be translated into standard galactic. Commander Thexville occupied the shuttle's forward section with his security detail, their conversation conducted in rapid-fire military dialect that Jake recognized but couldn't follow completely. The tone suggested procedural complications that weren't covered by standard prisoner transfer protocols. "The tribunal expects immediate delivery," one of the younger guards was saying. "Processing protocols indicate execution schedule within 6 hours of arrival." "Tribunal expectations," Thexville replied carefully, "assume standard prisoner classifications. These cases involve academic research that may require specialized review. Commander, with respect, the charges are clear: theft of protected materials, violation of preservation protocols. The evidence appears conclusive." Jake listened to the exchange while pretending ignorance, understanding enough to recognize that Thexville was attempting to introduce procedural delays for reasons his subordinates didn't fully comprehend. The shuttle docked at a platform that extended from the governmental complex like a metallic flower reaching toward space. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see the processing facility that would be his final destination, a structure built into the heart of Zephyrian administrative power, its walls inscribed with historical records celebrating military victories and cultural achievements. "Prisoners will maintain silence during transport," Thexville announced as the docking clamps engaged. "Security protocols require immediate escort to processing facility. Any deviation from designated routes will result in immediate restraint application." The processing facility's interior was designed for maximum psychological impact on prisoners facing final judgment. The walls displayed rotating holographic records of previous tribunals, each one demonstrating the efficiency of Zephyrian justice through carefully edited highlights of confessions, verdicts, and executions. Jake was separated from Elena at the facility's main checkpoint, her transfer to consortium custody handled by humans in administrative uniforms who treated the handover like routine paperwork. Their brief eye contact as she was led away carried the weight of shared understanding about discoveries that would probably die with them. "Prisoner Sullivan," Thexville said formally, "you are now under exclusive Zephyrian jurisdiction pending tribunal review." Processing protocols require medical examination, psychological evaluation, and formal charges presentation before final judgment. The medical facility occupied an entire floor of the processing center, its equipment designed to handle the anatomical diversity of prisoners from across the galaxy. Jake submitted to the examination with resigned cooperation, noting that the facility's inscriptions included linguistic elements that confirmed his suspicions about systematic cultural suppression. Medical data indicates standard human physiology, the examining physician reported to Thexville in Zephyrian. No obvious enhancement or modification. Neurological scan shows patterns consistent with advanced linguistic training. How advanced? Thexville asked. Synaptic development suggests fluency in multiple dead languages, possibly extending to preconsortium dialects. The neural pathways indicate someone who thinks in several linguistic frameworks simultaneously. Jake caught the exchange while pretending to examine his own medical readouts, understanding that his linguistic abilities were being discussed as potential security concerns rather than academic achievements. The psychological evaluation was conducted by a Zephyrian specialist whose scales carried gold markings that indicated advanced educational credentials. Her questions probed Jake's motivations for studying extinct languages, his methodology for accessing restricted archives, and his understanding of the political implications of his research. "Do you believe your linguistic research challenges official historical records?" she asked, her standard galactic precise despite obvious discomfort with the language. "I believe historical records should be accurate," Jake replied carefully. "If research reveals discrepancies, those should be addressed through academic review rather than administrative suppression. And if academic review concludes that certain historical records are too dangerous for public access? Then the review process should explain why dangerous information is more harmful than ignorant decision-making." The psychologist made extensive notes, her expression suggesting someone encountering perspectives that didn't fit standard evaluation categories. When the processing was complete, Jake found himself in a holding cell designed for maximum symbolic impact. The walls were carved from living rock, their surfaces inscribed with the names of thousands who had faced Zephyrian judgment over the centuries. Each name was accompanied by a brief description of crimes and punishments, creating a historical catalogue of official justice. Commander Thexville appeared outside the cell as evening lighting replaced the harsh illumination of day cycle processing. "Prisoner Sullivan," he said formally, though something in his posture suggested personal rather than professional interest. "Tribunal convenes at dawn. Standard protocol indicates execution within 2 hours of verdict announcement." "I understand, Commander. May I ask a question about procedure?" Thexville nodded cautiously. "The inscriptions in this facility include linguistic elements from preconsortium Zephyrian dialects. Are those historical records, or do they represent ongoing cultural practices?" The commander's expression shifted from professional neutrality to something that might have been surprise. "You recognize preconsortium script?" "Some of it. My research included comparative analysis of Zephyrian spiritual texts from before your people joined the consortium military structure." "And what did that analysis reveal?" Jake looked directly into the alien's reptilian eyes, recognizing an opportunity that might be his last chance to share discoveries that would otherwise die with him. That preconsortium Zephyrian culture contained philosophical and spiritual concepts that were apparently abandoned when your people became the consortium's primary enforcement arm. The linguistic evidence suggests a deliberate cultural transition rather than natural evolution. Thexville was silent for a long moment, his scaled features unreadable as he processed implications that extended beyond prisoner processing protocols. "Such research," he said carefully, "would require access to materials that have been classified for cultural preservation purposes, which I apparently accessed through archives that weren't supposed to contain such materials." Someone with administrative authority has been allowing researchers to study suppressed historical records. The commander stepped closer to the cell's transparent barrier, his voice dropping to barely audible levels. Prisoner Sullivan, are you aware that discussing pre-consortium cultural practices can be considered seditious activity under current law? I'm aware that my execution is already scheduled, Commander. At this point, sedition seems like a minor additional charge. Thexville studied Jake with the expression of someone calculating risks that extended far beyond individual prisoner processing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight that transformed routine interaction into something approaching conspiracy. The tribunal convenes at dawn. Prepare yourself accordingly. As the commander departed, Jake realized that his linguistic knowledge had created complications that extended far beyond academic research. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions about the intersection of personal conscience and institutional authority, assuming he lived long enough to understand them. Dawn on Kethmoran arrived with the artificial precision of atmospheric processors cycling through their daily routines, though no natural sunlight had touched the planet's surface for over a millennium. Jake woke to find Commander Thexville waiting outside his cell with a full guard unit, their ceremonial armor polished to mirror brightness for the formal procession that Zephyrian law required before executions. Prisoner Sullivan, Thexville announced with ritual formality, you will accompany the guard of final justice to face tribunal judgment. Maintain dignity during transport. Resist compliance and face immediate restraint. The procession through Kethmoran's governmental complex was designed for maximum psychological impact on both prisoner and witnesses. Jake walked between 6 guards while hundreds of Zephyrian citizens lined the crystal corridors, their scaled faces showing the mixture of curiosity and satisfaction that accompanied public justice. The route passed through chambers celebrating military history, each wall displaying holographic records of battles that had established Zephyrian dominance throughout the sector. The execution chamber was a vast amphitheater carved from the living rock beneath the city's floating platforms. Its walls were inscribed with the names of every being who had faced final judgment in Zephyrian territory. The acoustic design amplified sound perfectly, ensuring that even whispered words carried clearly to the highest observation platforms where government officials witnessed the efficiency of their justice system. Charges against the prisoner, announced the tribunal's senior judge, his voice carrying the harmonic overtones that marked formal legal Zephyrian, include theft of protected cultural materials, violation of galactic preservation protocols, and unauthorized access to classified historical records. Jake stood in the chamber's center while 3 judges reviewed evidence that had been compiled during his transport and processing. The holographic display showed his academic records, research methodology, and the specific archive materials he had accessed during his investigation of suppressed languages. The evidence demonstrates systematic violation of cultural protection statutes, the second judge declared. The prisoner accessed materials restricted to authorized scholars, conducted analysis without proper supervision, and developed conclusions that challenge official historical records. Furthermore, added the third judge, the prisoner's research threatens cultural stability by questioning the preservation methods used to protect extinct languages from misinterpretation and academic exploitation. The formal charges reading continued for nearly an hour, each accusation building toward inevitable conclusions about Jake's guilt and the necessity of permanent removal from galactic society. He listened with the calm attention of someone who had accepted that legal proceedings were theater rather than genuine evaluation of evidence. Prisoner Sullivan, the senior judge announced, do you wish to offer testimony before final judgment is rendered? I do, Your Honor. Speak truthfully. False statements will be detected and will aggravate sentencing. Jake looked up at the observation platforms where Zephyrian officials watched with expressions of professional interest, then addressed the tribunal with the clarity that came from having nothing left to lose. Your Honors, I stand accused of theft, but I took nothing. I stand accused of violation, but I harmed no one. I stand accused of unauthorized access, but the materials I studied were available through legitimate academic channels. He paused, letting his words echo through the chamber's perfect acoustics. My real crime was discovering that certain languages weren't extinct, they were suppressed. That certain historical records weren't lost, they were hidden. That certain cultural transitions weren't natural evolution, they were systematic erasure disguised as preservation. The judges exchanged glances that suggested his testimony was following expected patterns of desperate denial mixed with seditious accusations. The prisoner's statements, the senior judge observed, demonstrate the dangerous conclusions that result from unauthorized academic investigation. Such research leads inevitably to unfounded conspiracy theories that threaten social stability. Prepare for final sentencing, the second judge announced. Standard protocols indicate immediate execution following verdict announcement. Commander Thexville stepped forward with the ceremonial restraints used during final judgment, his expression carefully neutral despite the personal conflict Jake had glimpsed during their previous conversations. The guard unit moved into position around the chamber's execution platform, their movements precise and professional. Prisoner will submit to restraint application, Thexville announced, approaching Jake with energy shackles designed to prevent last-minute resistance. As the commander reached for Jake's arms, the fabric of his shirt tore slightly during the restraint process, revealing a small section of his neck that had been hidden beneath his collar. Thexville's hands froze as he caught sight of intricate markings tattooed into Jake's skin, symbols that formed a complex linguistic pattern combining ancient Zephyrian script with mathematical notations that predated consortium influence. The commander's scaled features went pale, his eyes widening as he recognized symbols that hadn't been displayed openly in Zephyrian society for over 3 centuries. The tattoo identified Jake as having been inducted into the Keepers of Lost Words, a secret academic society dedicated to preserving knowledge of suppressed languages and cultural practices. "Stop!" Thexville whispered, his voice barely audible despite the chamber's acoustic enhancement. The other guards paused, confused by their commander's sudden hesitation during routine execution protocols. On the observation platforms, government officials leaned forward to understand the delay in proceedings that should have concluded with mechanical efficiency. "Commander," the senior judge called down, "is there a procedural complication?" Thexville stared at the tattoo marking Jake's neck, recognition dawning as he processed implications that extended far beyond prisoner processing. The symbols were more than decorative, they were a formal declaration of Jake's status as a guardian of cultural knowledge that Zephyrian law was bound to protect. "Your Honor," Thexville said slowly, his voice carrying across the amphitheater with growing strength, "the prisoner bears the mark of ancestral preservation." Complete silence fell across the execution chamber as hundreds of Zephyrian witnesses processed words they hadn't heard spoken publicly in their lifetimes. "Commander, clarify your statement," the senior judge demanded. Thexville straightened to full attention, his military bearing now serving purposes that transcended consortium authority. "The prisoner bears tattoo markings that identify him as a keeper of lost words, inducted into academic preservation societies that predate consortium cultural policies." He gestured toward Jake's neck where the revealed symbols glowed softly under the chamber's artificial lighting. "Ancient Zephyrian law grants sanctuary to keepers of lost words. Such individuals are protected under pre-consortium cultural statutes that supersede current legal authority." The tribunal judges conferred in rapid, hushed tones while the assembled witnesses processed the unprecedented invocation of laws that most had believed were purely historical. Jake felt the energy shackles loosening around his wrists as Thexville stepped back, his expression showing the conflict between current orders and ancient obligations. "Commander Thexville," the senior judge announced, "pre-consortium laws have no authority over current tribunal proceedings. Consortium legal framework supersedes all previous cultural legislation." "With respect, Your Honor," Thexwell replied, his voice gaining strength as he committed to a course of action that would define the rest of his career. Zephyrian membership in the consortium was conditional upon preservation of core cultural values. The protection of knowledge keepers represents a fundamental aspect of Zephyrian identity that cannot be superseded by external authority. The chamber erupted in voices as government officials and military personnel debated the unprecedented legal situation. Jake stood in the center of the chaos, understanding that his survival now depended on ancient laws he had never known existed. The mark of ancestral preservation, Thexwell continued, addressing the tribunal directly, was granted to this human by someone with legitimate authority to induct keepers of lost words. Such induction creates legal obligations that Zephyrian honor cannot ignore. Explain the implications, Commander, the second judge demanded. The prisoner cannot be executed for preserving cultural knowledge that Zephyrian law commands us to protect. His research into suppressed languages represents exactly the kind of scholarly activity that the Keeper traditions were designed to safeguard. Jake found his voice, addressing the tribunal with new understanding of his situation. Your Honors, I received this mark from Professor Kethna, my graduate advisor at the University of New Geneva. He was a Zephyrian exile who spent his life preserving the original cultural texts of your people. The name created another wave of stunned silence. Professor Kethna had been a legendary figure in xenolinguistic circles, though few had known his true origins or the reason for his exile from Zephyrian space. Kethna of the Third Ancestral House, Thexwell said with something approaching reverence, was exiled for refusing to surrender pre-consortium spiritual texts to consortium cultural management. His scholarly credentials included authority to induct knowledge keepers under ancient law. The senior judge stood, his expression showing the strain of navigating legal territory that hadn't been tested in centuries. If the prisoner's induction was legitimate, and if pre-consortium preservation laws remain valid under current legal framework, then tribunal authority may be insufficient to proceed with execution. Furthermore, Thexwell added, the prisoner's research into suppressed languages represents fulfillment of keeper obligations rather than violation of cultural protection statutes. His work served to preserve and analyze exactly the kind of knowledge that ancient law commands us to protect. Jake felt the fundamental dynamics of his situation shifting as legal precedent collided with political necessity. Commander, does this mean the charges against me are invalid? It means, Thexwell replied carefully, that your status as a keeper of lost words creates legal complications that require a resolution through channels other than standard tribunal procedures. The third judge consulted digital archives, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he reviewed centuries-old legal texts. The ancient preservation statutes appear to remain technically valid. Consortium Integration Treaty specifically exempted core cultural laws from modification or repeal. Then we have a problem, the senior judge observed. Current policy demands prosecution of cultural theft, but ancient law demands protection of knowledge preservation activities. Commander Thexwell stepped forward, his decision crystallizing into formal declaration. Your Honors, I invoke ancient sanctuary protocols on behalf of Keeper Sullivan. Zephyrian law grants him protection from prosecution for activities undertaken in fulfillment of preservation obligations. The amphitheater fell completely silent as the implications settled over the assembled witnesses. Jake realized he was watching the birth of a legal precedent that would reshape the relationship between ancient cultural obligations and modern political authority. Ancient sanctuary, the senior judge repeated slowly, has not been invoked in over 2 centuries. Because, Thexwell replied with growing confidence, it has not been needed. But the prisoner's situation represents exactly the kind of cultural preservation crisis that such laws were designed to address. The resolution, when it came, was both anticlimactic and revolutionary. Jake's execution was indefinitely postponed pending review of ancient legal precedents by cultural authorities who would need months to research questions that hadn't been relevant for generations. More importantly, his knowledge of linguistic suppression became the foundation for a broader investigation into consortium cultural policies that had operated without oversight for centuries. 6 months later, Jake found himself working alongside Commander Thexville in a joint commission tasked with recovering and preserving suppressed historical records. Their partnership represented something unprecedented in galactic politics: cooperation between human academic research and Zephyrian cultural authority in service of truth rather than political convenience. The consortium, Thexville observed during one of their research sessions, built its authority on the assumption that ancient laws were purely ceremonial. They never anticipated those laws being invoked to challenge current policy. Jake looked up from the historical texts they were translating, documents that revealed the systematic nature of cultural suppression across dozens of worlds. Professor Kethna always said that knowledge preserved in secret eventually demands to be shared openly. I think he would have appreciated the irony. He would have appreciated the justice, Thexville corrected. Ancient law protecting modern scholars who preserve the wisdom he spent his life safeguarding. Through the research center's windows, they could see other teams working to decode suppressed languages and recover lost historical records. Jake's mark, the tattoo that had saved his life, had become a symbol of the growing movement to reclaim cultural knowledge that had been hidden for generations. The keeper of lost words had become, quite literally, a keeper of the future.